In a democracy, the majority rule. Those in society who vote all have the same amount of power and are equal in a perfect democracy. On the other hand, justice is a main goal in any society as well. It can be seen as fairness, reason, or the administration of law. Throughout history, many instances have invoked a difference in these two aspects. I have divided these events into four time periods: 1913 to 1920, 1942 to 1945, 1965 to 1975, and 2001 to the present 2012. In this documentary, you can think about the different aspects of democracy and justice, and whether or not each is present in these events. Voting is one of the most basic rights in a democracy. The 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution established direct election of United States senators by popular vote in 1913. The senators before this were elected by state legislators and not by the majority rule of the population. Those who were already in power were the ones electing people for their posts, and those who the senators represented didn't have any say. As I said before, voting is one of the most basic rights in a democracy. The 19th Amendment advocated that any sex could vote. Before this, it was decided by individual states, and every state disenfranchised women. Until 1920, when this amendment was ratified by the required amount of states, even though women could not vote on the subject, the amendment was ratified and women finally achieved equality with voting. In both these events, they focus on a larger percent of the population being able to vote. The second time period is from 1942 to 1945 and encompasses the U.S. involvement in World War II. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and made the U.S. enter World War II in 1942, all the Japanese Americans in the West Coast and Southern Asia were put in internment camps by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's executive order. Americans were being treated differently just based on the hunch that one of them might be a traitor. The U.S. population didn't make this decision, and nobody could argue with the internment camps because it was an executive order, even if they believed it was immoral, wrong, or unjust. After the United States entered World War II because of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. ended the war by dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan. The atomic bomb being dropped in 1945 was an executive order, and one way to look at this is that one Japanese life is worth the same as one American life. The excuse that it ended the war faster and possibly saved more lives could be disputed and may or may not be a legitimate justification. Both of these events encompassed World War II, which dramatically changed America's image at home and to the rest of the world. The third time period is from 1965 to 1975. There has always been racism in the U.S. since the time of slavery. Before 1965, the whole population of the United States could not vote, such as the 11% of African Americans in the U.S. So all of the people in the United States couldn't have the opportunity to vote. However, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 allowed African Americans to vote for the first time in United States history. Voting laws changed, and you could vote regardless of the color of your skin or the gender with the 19th Amendment, like I said before. The Vietnam War started in 1957 because of the fear that communism would spread in Southeast Asia and lasted until 1975. At the beginning of the war, it was widely supported, but this progressively declined, and in 1970 the majority of the population were opposed to the Vietnam War, which sparked myriad protests to stop it. One of these protests was at Kent State, where 4 students were killed by the National Guard because they refused to disperse their protests. The students were being suppressed, and the Constitution tells us that everyone should be able to speak their mind, even if they are not high-ranking officials. But because of the increased protest all around the United States, the Vietnam War ended only 5 years later. This was a turning point in United States history because of the extreme measures used to stop the protests, the United States democracy was strengthened through this change and finally ended the war. The fourth and final time period is 2001 to the present 2012. The terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001 was certainly an atrocious event, but the reaction to it could be called uncalled for, because it was a terrorist attack from Al-Qaeda and not from Afghanistan, who the United States waged war on. Although the majority of the United States advocated for the war with Afghanistan or harboring Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group was the true problem, not Afghanistan, and just because they had roots there does not mean that you have to attack them. On the other hand, you could think about how Afghanistan lets them take refuge there and accepts them and doesn't make them leave. In the devastating Hurricane Katrina in 2005, almost 2,000 people were killed. The evacuation process was made to help people get away from an imminent threat. However, many lower-class citizens were killed during Hurricane Katrina because they were unable to leave because the evacuation process did not account for those who did not have any means of transportation or did not have a television or computer to know what was going on. The majority of the people were upper class or had transportation, but those who did not were left behind when everyone could have been accounted for regardless of their poverty. Buses could have been provided to help the poor citizens, and you could think that they were being neglected, but you could also think about how the organizers might just have been too caught up in what devastation might come without thinking about those who were really in need. In 2008, gay marriage in Connecticut was made legal and is only one of 2 states to have done so. In 2010, the United States supporters of gay marriage finally achieved majority. The decision of gay couples being together is decided at the state level, and the ethics of gay marriage is still debated. The majority of the United States believes that they should be able to be together, but most states still can't agree on other aspects of gay marriage, like the morals of it and that marriage should be between a man and a woman. Justice, as defined before, is blind, so marriage could be seen as something that should be allowed to let any couple be together regardless of their sexual orientation. Even though gay marriage is not legal everywhere yet, it's come a long way in United States history because of the change in people's views. Because the majority rule, gay marriage laws are just starting to change, but the reasoning against it up to this point is still being debated and by supporters and opposers. The death penalty, just like gay marriage, is decided at the state level. The majority of the United States believes that the death penalty is morally acceptable, although this has been steadily declining in the United States. 17 states currently prohibit the death penalty as a sentence, including Connecticut, which recently changed its policies. The majority of the people believe that it's morally acceptable, but is it just? Bryan Stevenson brought up a good point on TED Talk, saying that the main question is, do people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed? But that another way to look at it is, do we deserve to kill? Most Americans believe people should die for the crimes they've committed, but is it up to us to decide whether a man or woman lives or dies? Most of my topics have to do with equal rights and who deserves to live or die. I believe that everyone deserves equality and a life to live, regardless of what they do in life, even if this is unrealistic. I believe that the true justice is blind, and no matter what race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or differences that there are with a person, they're all equal. However, in a democracy, justice can be debated and does not always follow the right path. Just because the majority of people believe something does not mean it is just. In the first time period, I believe that there was a lack of democracy and justice, and both of these changed with more majority rule and having the people and women being able to vote. In the second time period, I think there was no democracy and no justice present, because I believe you can't justify bombing someone's homeland like that and cooping up people just as an extra precaution. In the third time period, I think there was a lot of change from no democracy and no justice with blacks voting, not being able to protest, to black voting rights, and the end of the Vietnam War, which was wanted by the majority. In the fourth time period, I believe that there was a lot of democracy when it comes to making decisions but I don't think that there was enough justice since 2001 with waging war on Afghanistan, not allowing gays and homosexuals to marry, and putting people to death by the death penalty.